Implausible Nature now has dice. That's right, you can get these awesome D6s made by our partner, Baron of Dice. These custom dice have the Implausible Nature logo on the 6 side and also come with square corners, which means they will roll more evenly than rounded corner dice. Head on over to baronofdice.com and use discount code IN40K to get a discount on your order and support us at the same time. Welcome to Implausible Nature, your home for all things Black Templar. On today's video, we've got another list for you. I really like this list. This is a very spicy list that Bob put together and has been doing very well with. He has a really high win percentage with this list. And over the course of dozens of games, so he's got a good sample size. It's not in a tournament yet. He hasn't had a chance to run it in a tournament yet. But he is playing against tournament players with tournament lists, so he's not not exactly clubbing Baby's heels down at the LGS there. But this, you may remember in our trade style list video, we talked about trade units and things like that. We kind of alluded to this list. This is the list that we were talking about. Bob, let's get right into it. Let's talk about this list. Why don't you run us through what you've got, and we'll kind of talk about what these units are for.
Awesome. Yeah, so again, I want to just reiterate with this. I have not got to a tournament in the last probably 4 or 5 months due to my younger children and work. So I haven't been able to get to a tournament to test it out, but I have been playing it a lot. And it's been very, very good. My caveat with this is learning how to play a trade style list will take practice.
Yeah. This isn't a, you're not going to be able to net list this, grab this off the internet and go, all right, I'm going to go win a tournament. It's going to take practice. It is a very good list, but it's going to take practice in order to master it and make sure that you are, using the pieces in the right way.
Yep. This is when we talk about having a learning curve of the Black Templar, and we talk in Discord a lot about this, and why our win rate is what it is this is the style of list that would be at the top of your learning curve and what you want to do from experience. So I'll go through the list and we'll kind of get into it a little bit. All right, so obviously we're going to have the list in the description so you can see it and you can follow along on it. But I'll explain why I took everything after I list out everything. So I start off with the Agents of the Imperium. I do have a Zerker Inquisitor. I take
Filthy
esoteric lore for the Xenos. I have a power sword on him. He's also the Arbiter of the Emperor's Will. And the Xenos spell, the Psychic Veil. I have a Jump Pack Chaplain with Exhortation of Rage with the Canticle of Hate. Just basic armaments there. I have the Master of Sanctity, obviously, because he's got the two there. He is going to be the Warlord with a Warlord trait. He is the Wise Orator. Then I have High Marshal Helbrecht. My troops, I have 2 Incursor squads. 5-man. I have an Infiltrator squad, 5-man with the Heedless Gauntlet. I have the Judicar with the Hero of the Chapter with Oathkeeper. I have a 10-man Primaris Sword Brethren squad. Yes, you heard that right. I have a Holy Orb on them. I have 2 Thunderhammers, 2 paired Lightning Claws, and the rest of them are Stordy's Chainswords. I have 2 5-man Relic Terminator squads. They all have Chain Fists and Combi Bolters. I have 2 Vanguard Veteran squads, obviously with jump packs. One of them has Revered Repositories with Sword of Judgment and a Storm Shield on their Sergeant. The other one has the Fist of Balthus and a Storm Shield and Champion the Feast on the Sergeant. And then I finish off the list with 2 Impulsors with the added Multi-Melta. So that leaves me, after CP use, 1 CP and a flat 2,000 points.
That's definitely different than what we're used to seeing. Obviously, Primaris Sword Brethren, is a more unusual take for a tournament list. Impulsors are a more unusual take for a tournament list. That said, though, I really like this list. I like it because obviously Bob's had success with it, right? So that's a good thing. A list that someone is having success with means that it's viable. But beyond that, you guys know that I love, the lore a lot, and I love thematic lists. And I feel like this list is very thematic. It's very much like, a shock and awe Space Marine list, like get in your face. It's very fast moving. These are like the guys at the forefront of the attack of the crusade, to break the back of the opponent, while the rest of the army floods in. So, a very thematic style list as well, which always great when those two, competitive and theme come together to form a fantastic list. Um, I guess Bob, tell us a little bit about some of the more interesting design choices here with this, specifically like Primaris Sword Brothers and Impulsors. In this, those are definitely a little bit out of the norm.
Yeah, yeah. So as we talked about in the trade unit video, I wanted to really go hard into the trade style strategy in the list. And I really talked in depth about trading in the last video, so I'm not going to go deep into that, but the basic overview is you want to get to objectives, take as many of them as you can, and if you lose some objectives because your units died, oh well, because I have a ton more units that can get there and
Yep.
take it back over.
Got wave 2 coming, wave 3 coming.
Yep. So that's basically, I started with that, and I decided the MSU, multiple small units, was the best way to get to that point with the Space Marines and the tools that we have. Now, it's big chasm in what has been successful. We have a wide variety of lists that have won GTs and different styles or been very successful in that. But one of the biggest things that matters the most in success, and many of these interviews that we talked about this, is you have to score the primary and deny your opponent primary. That's the key. We don't have really great secondaries. We can score reasonably well, and I'll get to that in a second because some of my choices play into that. But you have to score points in the primary, and you need to deny them from your opponent, because your opponent may have very easy secondaries to score, and you can't influence whether or not they're going to get them. So the only way that you're going to play that game and be able to influence the ending score is by trading and making sure that those primaries are in your possession. And you need units to do that. You need a lot of them. And you need to be able to do some damage by taking them back or outnumbering them on the objective. So that's kind of how the thought behind this list, as far as the overall brainstorm before the list began, right? So early iterations was a little bit more durable as far as that went, and that worked okay. But I like having more stuff, honestly. So I decided later on in this final iteration to add Inquisitors, and Alex, I haven't forgotten about the Impulsors in the Sword Brethren, I promise. In earlier iterations, I didn't have the Inquisitor, but I was thinking about it, and I was looking at our secondaries. This is prior to the buff to shock tactics, And we didn't really have any good ones, honestly. With banners were out there, so that was an outtake pretty much for all of my list. But then it was oaths was kind of a good one sometimes not, depending on the mission. But beyond that, there's shock tactics. Sometimes was good, um, sometimes not good, and there really wasn't anything else out there other than maybe assassination, bring them down, that type of thing. But that was really opponent dependent. So I wanted something more consistent, something that I could count on every single game to score me points. So that's where the Psychic Inquisitor came in. So that gives me access to a whole another 2 secondaries that are reliable. Psychic Interrogation or Warp Ritual, depending on my opponent. So Psychic Interrogation obviously can be maxed out. So if that's something that you can do and they can't deny you, that's going to be the take. If they can deny you, Warp Ritual to get into the center of the board might be a better option for you, so that you can get at least some points by getting a couple casts off. So at least you're going to get some more reliable points, 8 points, maybe 12 points, depending on the game. That's kind of the strategy behind the Inquisitor. And honestly, I want some CP. So that's why I went with the Esoteric Lore on the Xenos. So every time your opponent uses a stratagem, you have a 5+ chance to get some CP back. And extra CP is never, ever a bad thing.
Yep.
So he was a great utility points to basically farm me secondary points and potentially CP. A 33% chance to get some CP back is, I'll take it. I mean, I'm notoriously bad at rolling 5+s, but I do get CP back, so that's good. All right, so getting back to the Impulsors. So my list has 3 waves of attack in how it plays. So actually, technically 4. So as you may notice that my troops all have concealed positions. So in a typical game, my infiltrators or my home objective holders, they sit there, they block out my opponent from getting in my deployment zone, so they aren't causing any issues. My incursors deploy, forward deploy, go to no man's land and get some objectives right off the bat. I put the pressure on my opponent to come get them and take them from me, because if they don't, I'm going to score max points on primary second turn right away. So that forces my opponent to play into my trade game, which automatically right away forces them to be reactive to what I am doing. Even if their list wants them to be aggressive, I want them to come at me. I want them to trade. And if they don't do that and they just let me sit on objectives, I'm going to win the game. That's just, it is. That's what's going to happen. So that's the first wave. I get on 3 objectives right away. So I'm already scoring max points, theoretically, on my objectives. But I also have my Vanguard Veteran drum troops. So they're hiding, but they have 12-inch range, and they have a chaplain that can increase the range of their charges. So I can deep strike them if I need to with my jump pack chaplain, if it's necessary, because I also deep strike most of the time. I deep strike my Relic Terminators. So my Vanguard Veterans are kind of my first push towards objectives to trade. So my opponent's coming at me at the objectives, trying to take them. My Vanguard Veterans go in there, counter strike. I don't play them super aggressively until there's something to take, right? But if there's terrain or ruins or something on an objective,
Do you
then
keep them both, the 2 squads, together with the chaplain, or do you split them up across the battlefield?
So I'll split them. Typically, I'll keep one of my, if my chaplain didn't deep strike, I'll keep one of them with them. If my opponent overloaded a side of the board, then I'll keep them together if I can hide them well enough, or they may meet at an objective. where that's appropriate. So I do that depending on the opponent and how they deployed, but they're not typically bunched together, at least after they move. So I may deploy them that way if the terrain is big enough,
Yeah.
but they may not stay that way. So that's the first round. Second round is I have my impulsors that are filled with my Primaris Sword Brethren. So these in earlier iterations were Blade Guard veterans. I found that the Blade Guard veterans didn't really fit what I was trying to do with them. They're more expensive, first off, for what you're putting into the impulsor. They're more durable, so they don't need an impulsor. And honestly, they do a decent amount of damage, but they don't trade like I want them to. Um, they're going to kill whatever they do, but they're not going to die. So that is problematic for my secondaries. So shock tactics is typically what I take for this list now, especially after the buff. And Blade Guard veterans don't really die very easily, so that makes it kind of a problem, if my opponent tries to take that objective from me. Obviously, if it's an
This
objective
just in,
secured.
folks. Bob wants his units to die.
Hey, we're the Black Templars. We can replace our stuff easily, right? We got tons of neophytes. So I split up my Primaris Sword Brethren into 2 different units with character support. So I'll put 2 Lightning Claws and 3 Chainswords with Hellbrook and the Holy Orb in one, and then I'll take 2 Thunder Hammers with the Judicar with the 3 Chainswords in the other one. Now, with their associated characters, they are enough to kill most units that would be going after an objective. They're not going to kill heavy elite units. That is not what they're designed to do. If that was the case, then that's where you take multiple units together and assault, or you take the vanguards and you also assault that particular unit so that you are bringing more units to bear on a more elite unit. So, but what that is important for is they are the second wave, or depending on the list, they can be the first wave if you want. What's great about them?
How do you utilize the impulsor with them? Do you obviously move that impulsor out? Do you move it out first turn, second turn? Do you sit it in the open? Are you trying to get it behind obscuring? Obviously, you're not getting those guys out until they're ready to charge, right?
Yep. So most of the time, turn 1, they're not going to be effective. So they're hiding. So the impulsor hides as best as it can first turn until it's my turn. So if I have the first turn, I'll move them. If I can get them behind cover, that's great. But typically, I'm not going to be able to. They're usually not in range of an objective. Usually. So that's where the Vanguard veterans come in. If I can get them behind cover and towards an objective, great. But the point of the impulsor is to, that second turn, get to that objective, hold it. Even better if my opponent's not on that side of the board, so I can just stay in that impulsor and they can eat shots.
Just hang out.
Yeah, and sit in there. The impulsor gives that unit durability. I can still pot shot with my Stormbolters on it and my Multi-Melta, which is incidental anti-vehicle, which is not great. There, as you may have seen, there's not a ton of shooting in it, but that I have ways to kill vehicles in the list if I need to.
Feels like the tournament player that we interviewed, where it was like, well, there's no shooting in this list, and he goes, no, I've got storm bolters.
Yeah. So I mean, it's very similar as far as the shooting to close combat in that list. But what's great about the impulsors is you can use them to move block. Now, on most tournament boards, there's not a ton of space in between ruins and different things. So, especially against vehicle heavy armies or knights or imperial knights or whatever it may be, stick that impulsor sideways in between a lane or a fire lane and block shots to your units, or force them to go all the way around you or kill that impulsor before they can get to the objective or your weak flank. That's what is really great about them. So 130 points for incidental shooting and transport, but they have so much utility in movement phase. They can eat uh, Overwatch for your opponent, so you can charge them in first. And you'd be surprised at how much damage these things will do with, I can't roll a 5+ for save my life, but I can roll that 6+. So they've done some damage, in critical points to do in close combat. Charge them in first, get in there. So now that, if they're going to shoot Overwatch, they got to do it at a vehicle, which is not ideal. Then you charge in with your Primaris Sword Brethren. So easy peasy, lemon squeezy. So that's something that's really nice. Terminators. They're in the list to keep my opponent pinned in their deployment zone. So the threat of having a Terminator squad or 2 Terminator squad deep striking into their deployment zone, if they have not properly blocked, is a critical point of winning a game. Because again, you want to have your opponent reacting to what you're doing. So not only are you forcing your opponent to react to you on the concealed positions, so they have to get to you right away or you're going to score max points, right? They're reacting to you fully advancing to the rest of the objectives with your other units, your trade units, and they're either hidden or in a durable transport. And finally, they have to be mindful of a deep strike. So they have to keep something back into their deployment zone to block you from deep striking and taking out their deployment zone.
So do you bring them in on turn 2 usually, or do you wait till turn 3 to try to force them to stay in their deployment zone? What do
So it
you
depends
typically
on
do with
the
that?
the game.
Yeah,
A lot
obviously,
of
but
times, I drop them in on 2 because at that point, my opponent into the second turn, especially if I have the bottom half, will have committed to something at that point. If I have the top half, I would say about 50-50. I keep them in turn 3.
do you usually bring them both in at once, or
Yeah,
have you split them and brought one in?
I'll usually do them together, but I have done them in separate turns.
And do you typically try to put them in the same area of the board, or are you putting them in different parts of the board?
So in the case of like an opponent like a Knights, where I need to use their chain fist to kill vehicles, I will split them up. But the point is to keep your opponent in their side of the board, or take an objective. So they could also be a trade unit. So I don't really want to be in my opponent's deployment zone unless I'm using the Relic Terminator squad. Those are the exceptions to the rule. I want to own no man's zone, own no man's land. So let's say I have one of my flank folds over. They put all their elite stuff on the one side of the board, and my trade units are just not doing it for me. They can't hold up to what's coming up. That's where I would react to with a deep strike to reinforce that flank. Maybe I can't get to that objective quick enough with a Vanguard squad, or maybe they're not going to kill that. That would be something where I would drop those in and storm bolter them a bunch before I trade in. And Chain Fist may not be great against like infantry due to the D3. They do still, on average, do 2 damage. So they kill Marines very well. And they do have the high end opportunity to do damage 3 against infantry, so they can kill things like Terminators too, if necessary. But what they really really focusing on is if I need to kill vehicles, dreadnoughts, something that I need to get off the board, whether it be a knight or whatever it might be, depending on my opponent, obviously. That's what their target is if I need to kill something. So they're less of a trade, but they can contribute to that trade game.
Yeah.
But obviously, keep my opponent in their deployment zone, react to whatever is going on to the battlefield if necessary. I don't want to react because I want to be aggressive and force my game plan on my opponent. But there are the react piece that is in play if I need to have that piece if necessary.
Do you try to bring them in near excuse me, near the chaplain with Canticles of Hate to try to get an easy charge off? Or is that really just if it's convenient you'll do it, otherwise it's not a priority?
Yeah. So as I touched on with the chaplain earlier in the video, is might deep strike the chaplain, and that's the reason why I would is if I want to get a charge off in like the deployment zone to get their home objective, um, to make sure that I get like a 7-inch charge. That's also why I take Wise Orator instead of the Ancient Breviary, so that I have a 1 CP. Uh, Forgive me, the stratagem to
Commanding
automatically has.
Oratory.
Thank you, commanding
Yeah.
oratory, so that I get that off for 1 CP and make sure that I get the 2-inch charge. If I don't feel like I need it, and it's just a threat of keeping my opponent in there, and I just use that as a threat piece, then I will keep the chaplain on the board. So that's there. Another piece that kind of plays into this list is the application of fights last. So, as I mentioned, I have the Holy Orb and the Judicar in 2 separate impulsors to apply fights last where I need it. And this has been absolutely critical in many, many, many games where my opponent has a stronger melee unit than I do, or they potentially could do some damage to me, or they have a fights first on it, so we can fight at the same times, and I don't lose a unit. The Judicar has Oathkeeper to make sure that he gets within that 3-inch range. Doesn't necessarily have to get into combat, but he does do a decent amount of damage once he's there. He does have mortal wound capacity. He does have a damage to weapon. He's no slouch, so he can fight if he needs to. But he has a source of fights last as well as that Holy Orb, which also does mortal wounds. So if I need to push some extra damage uh, over the top onto an opponent, that's a good source of it there. Helbrecht is pretty self-explanatory. He's a beatstick. He can, on the charge, kill a
And
ton
he
of
makes
stuff.
those lightning claws strength 5, which is very juicy
Yep.
because that means they're gonna wound basically everything in the game on 5s at least, which is great. So especially with rerolls, that gives you a solid chance, and especially against things that are tough 4 or lower, you're gonna have a really high chance of doing a bunch of damage. So
Yep.
um,
It also makes the chain swords irrelevant on those guys. Whereas in the chain swords with the Thunderhammers are they'll kill
they're
basically
meat
one
shields.
Marine. But with Helbrecht, the 3 chain swords will kill 2 Marines on the charge. So they do a reasonable amount of damage. Plus, it also makes chain swords are the cheap option. They just have attacks. Yes, they will contribute in close combat. They're obviously the first thing that'll die, but they do have bulk of attacks, so you can use things like Gene Rot Might if I need to.
Yeah.
Exploding hits is on the table. I don't use it too terribly often, um, but it's there if I have a surplus of CP from my esoteric lore. So that's an option for you. So basically, kind of to review how the list goes again is I get to the center of the board right away with concealed positions. I get the rest of my elites units in waves to the rest of the objectives, and I use them to trade with my opponent. Depending on how my opponent is deployed, I will reinforce my concealed positions, take as many of them as I can. So the point is lose them. My opponent will take them from me because they will not allow me just win the game
Just to
outright.
sit on the
Yep.
objectives.
So they're going to take at least one from me. So that's where I apply my units, take it back over. Then I will get my shock tactics, which is going to be 4 points. Ideally, my Inquisitor by turn 2 is within range of an enemy character or the center of the board, so that he can do the secondaries, and he's going to protect himself with the Psychic Veil, which allows him to basically give himself Lookout Sir, which is very important, so he can't be shot. And then he just farms CP points, and then just continue to trade with my opponent. Terminators come in where they need to. If I have the opportunity to deep strike into my opponent's deployment zone, I'll do it. I'll take their home objective from them while I have all the other ones. If not, then I will use them to kill vehicles or trade again in no man's land if I need to.
Yep. Awesome. So that's the list, guys.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoyed it. Sounds really super deadly. I love the sort of like always just well, here's just my next unit that's gonna attack. That is how the trade style list works. As Bob described, definitely having more units like that, I think helps Space Marines a lot because um, there's always going to be those times where it's like, all right, my really super durable thing right here, I'm going to tank that stuff, and your dice go horribly, and now that squad is dead or almost dead, and you're like, what else do I got, right?
Yep.
This list, it's just, cool, you're going to dedicate a bunch of stuff to make sure you kill this unit and probably overkill it.
Yep.
I got another one coming up right behind it. So
Or
really
2 or
awesome,
3.
or 2 or 3 or several. So yeah, but let us know what you think. Have you tried a list similar to this? Are you going to try this list? Have you tried this list? If you're watching this down the road, how well did it do for you? And let us know. And make sure you check out our Patreon. We've got a really great Patreon with a lot of benefits. We've got our Discord, where we've got great discussions every day about Black Templars and how to be competitive and things like that. Um, so please come and join the community. We really appreciate all the support that you guys give us each and every week. So until next time, keep on crusading.